fear is in fact a combination of two factors. Okay, those two factors are uncertainty plus anxiety. You can have one or the other, and you don't necessarily have fear. Those qualities about a human being that allow us to do what we do and dictate if we have what it takes.
Welcome to everyone to Young Learner Podcast. I'm Daniele Mingolla, and today's episode is a tactical playbook for your career. My guest is Rich Diviney, a former Navy SEAL commander who specializes in selecting the absolute elite. Today, he breaks down the exact mental models and strategy used by the SEAL team and shows us how to apply them to our everyday lives and careers in order to survive the tech grind and become completely irreplaceable by the AI. Rich, it's an honor for me. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm glad you reached out. So it's a pleasure to be here.
So for the Italian public, okay, can you very briefly explain to us what the Navy SEAL teams, what people join this sort of team and why they are important? Because I see a lot of your interview I suppose for the American
Yeah.
people. I assume that an American person already know a lot,
Yeah.
about Navy SEAL,
Yeah.
but
The Navy SEALs are basically the Navy's special operations unit, tactical unit. And so we focus on mostly maritime, i.e., kind of waterborne type threats. A lot of our skills have to do with scuba diving and ship and vessel takedowns. However, SEAL stands for sea, air, land, which means we can go really anywhere. And so that's why we've been involved in all of the major conflicts, whether it be the middle of the desert, all the way to the sea. We are much like, and I worked with the Italian Incarcerate, or Incarcerate. I don't know how to pronounce it, but
yes.
great guys, very much like we are. And so we did some training on some ships. I got to visit some Italian Navy ships, and we did some training with those guys. So very, very similar to that unit.
Well, thank you very much. And you spent over 2 decades as a Navy SEAL, right? And retiring as a commander after being tasked with selecting and training the absolute top 1% of the military. I was studying as a mad all your books, and I was reading, the Attributes book, a book that I recommend everyone to purchase and to study because it contains a lot of useful information, link in the description. And you wrote the following claim that really struck me. And this is the claim. In such extreme situation, how you perform is much less about what you know than who you are. Your skills aren't necessarily important. Now, considering an audience of engineers and tech professionals who have spent their entire lives obsessing over hard skills, learning AI, learning programming language, and so on, how did your time in the SEALs lead you to that conclusion?
Well, it's more understandable, more simple than it seems. And the fact is that every skill that we have, whether we're a Navy SEAL and it's shooting and scuba diving, or an engineer and it's programming or writing code, all skills start with attributes. In other words, you can't acquire a skill unless attributes are involved. And so when we talk about attributes, we're talking about those qualities about a human being that allow us to do what we do and dictate if we have what it takes to do that very skill. So, for example, to be a Navy SEAL, you need qualities like adaptability and courage and situational awareness, right? And those are attributes. To be an engineer or a programmer, you need attributes like compartmentalization and discernment, which involves detail-oriented work and things like that. So it's more about the fact that as human beings, when we are thrust into environments where it's very uncertain and challenging and complex, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to apply a known skill to an unknown environment. So what we're doing is we're actually leaning on our attributes. Even in the engineering world, no matter what we're doing, if we are in an environment where we have to figure it out first, that figuring out process is going to start with our attributes until we kind of say, okay, now I understand and I can apply. So things like adaptability and situational awareness and compartmentalization come to play. So what I discovered was that these attributes, these qualities that we have as human beings, dictate how and why we perform the way we do. And that starts to be a very powerful clue into how we're going to perform in stressful, uncertain environments.
Yes, I totally agree with everything. And you know what really loved about the topics that you share on internet about these attributes is that when I start studying them, I study all your content. I said I need to invest a lot of time here, because these attributes are something that will stay with me forever. So, for our listeners, maybe today there is Python 3.10. Tomorrow there is a new version of a new program. The tool change,
Yes.
But if I able to adapt to be a good communicator, or to survive the stress. Okay, of course we are talking about different stress now, because when you are in a firefight, of course it's not like handling with a deadline in an IT company, but you know what I mean, right?
Yes.
But I need to learn this as soon as possible. And one of the attributes that really struck with me when I was reading your book was this cunning, right? So this sort of, I would say, lateral thinking. And I imagine, like a Navy SEAL team that in front of, imagine a lot of people, soldiers, like in a front door, they try to enter, but they are blocked, no?
Right.
So I say, okay, I assume that this guy, they don't just keep knocking.
Right.
So at the same time, I said, okay, imagine that I'm an engineer and I want to enter in a company. I'm like metaphorically knocking doors. How can I, in your opinion, a young tech professional apply this kind of unconventional lateral thinking to bypass the standard recruitment process, that typically consists, if you don't know, like sending a lot of CV. So is there like any mental models that we can apply, also for finding a new job?
Yes. Well, for a couple things there. And first of all, you're 100% correct. And that is, we are, as the world changes, as technology changes, and as jobs are created and destroyed because of the technology, the massive value proposition, the MVP for human beings, becomes our attributes, because that is what allows us to move and adapt and evolve to what's needed. And so the good news is that the same attributes that allowed you to become the best at what you're doing, whether it be a SEAL or a programmer or whatever, those attributes you can carry into a whole nother profession, a whole nother domain. And that's very exciting. And that should be very optimistic and hopeful for people, because it's not about the thing, the job you do. It's about the qualities that you can take so that you can do something else. And even in the SEAL teams, we always said we'd rather. I mean, when you join the SEAL teams, when I joined the SEAL teams, I'd never shot a gun before in my life. There are guys who join the SEAL teams, they've never even seen the ocean, let alone scuba dived, right? But the idea is, if you have the qualities, we're going to teach you how to do all of that stuff. And so understanding the qualities that we bring to the table is really very important and very empowering and motivating for someone who might feel like their skills are being usurped by the new technology. So that's I'm glad you brought that up. When it comes to something like cunning, I think that's a great one to talk about, because one of the things we have to understand about all the attributes, and there are 36 attributes. I know in the book I wrote about 25. Now we work with 36, and our assessment tool measures 36. But it's important to understand that we all have all of the attributes. That's number one. The difference in each one of us are the levels to which we have each attribute. So one person might be high on adaptability and low on perseverance. Another person might be high on discernment and low on cunning, whatever that is. But that starts to dictate performance. But just because you're low on something doesn't mean you don't have it. It just means you prioritize the other attributes before that. So that's number one. We all have all of them. And number two is that none of them are positive or negative. They're all neutral, right? So something like cunning, which some people can sometimes think is bad because they think of deception and deceit, all cunning is outside the box thinking. The cunning mind approaches a problem and immediately asks three questions. The first question is, are there rules and boundaries? Okay. The second question is, are those rules and boundaries real, or are they perceived? Because sometimes we think there's a rule, but it's actually just perceived, right? And the third question is, if they are real, what happens if I bend or break them? Okay. And the cunning mind starts to think of around outside the box solutions. So now the way we use cunning can certainly be judged. Someone can use cunning in a malevolent way for bad. Another person can use cunning for good. But cunning as an attribute is simply outside the box thinking. So for those folks who are higher in cunning, what they do quite naturally, is they'll be knocking on the door and they're like, this is not going to work. So they'll automatically start thinking about other ways to do it. One of the things that we did in the SEAL teams, one of the classic ways to go into a building was to blow the door open, right? Because if it's locked, we just blow it up, right? But we realized, if we blow the door open, then everybody knows we're there. So we began lock picking schools, and we began to try, we began to look at windows. Hey, is that window? So instead of immediately putting a bomb on the door. We're going to check the windows. We're going to check the locks. So you start using cunning to start doing things differently. So the idea is wherever you fall on these attributes, nothing's positive, nothing's negative. Don't judge it. Really, just use it, and use it in a way that can be advantageous to what you're trying to do.
Yeah, incredible. Yeah. I always, I was thinking about this example. I said this guy should be very smart, because not only they have to, open the door, but they also need to do very fast, maybe in a firefight, and you need also handle 10 other people, right, at the same time. So I completely agree. I found a lot of, just an example, okay. Typically people not send a lot of resume. One of my friend, you know what he did? He knew where the CEO guy was taking the coffee, the bar. He went there and he just present himself,
Yes. Yeah.
instead of sending. Sounds silly, but this is a sort of canny, and now he has a job, right?
Yes, 100%.
And 100%. And another topic that I really, I think it's really important. It's common in all of our life, regardless of our job. If you are a military or if you are a normal person, I would say, is the grind. Our listeners face brutal grinds because they need to study complex text in order to pass the interview. And this period are typically paired with the constant anxiety, that the AI might make their skill obsolete tomorrow. No?
Right.
You survived the bad hell week, so maybe also if you can a bit explain to the Italian public what the bad week is, where the sheer duration of the suffering breaks most people. What do you think it's like the neurobiological mechanism you needed to survive that hell week, and how a normal person can use the exact same mechanism, to simply not quit when the finish line feels impossible?
Yes. Well, it's an excellent question. And the first thing I want to do is I want to first let everybody know that I will definitely tell people what Hell Week is, and we could talk about Navy SEALs, but what people have to understand is when it comes to fear and anxiety and the grind, it is entirely subjective to the human being. So you made a reference. You said I wouldn't compare a gunfight to a deadline, but physiologically, you might be feeling the same way I am. In other words, you might have a bunch of Navy SEALs in a gunfight with Al Qaeda who are feeling less fear in that moment than the 8-year-old kid you just asked to step in front of the classroom and introduce themselves, right? So first we have to just humanize everything. Take the SEALs off the pedestal. We're all human beings. And then that empowers us to understand that all of these things we can do, these techniques, are all very human. So when we talk about making it through or getting through the grind, well, first of all, what is Hell Week? Hell Week is kind of the crucible out of a 6-month training program to become a Navy SEAL. It's about a 90% attrition rate. So about 90% of the guys who start don't make it through, they quit. But one of the crucibles, one of the hardest parts is week 5. Week 5 is known as Hell Week. Hell Week is a week where they get you up on a Sunday afternoon, or they start on a Sunday afternoon, and you go the entire week until that following Friday. And that entire week, you're running with boats on your head, and you're exercising, you're freezing cold, you're just doing crazy stuff. And you only sleep for about 2.5 hours for the entire week, not even 2.5 hours per night. It's for the entire week. So you're basically awake that whole time, just getting crushed. So a lot of people quit during Hell Week because it's such a grind. When we think about getting through that grind, I think one of the most important tools that I think we can use, and I talk about this in my second book, Masters of Uncertainty, is it has to do with this technique I call moving horizons. Okay, moving horizons. What that is it leverages our brain's ability to perceive an environment. What do I mean by that? When we are in an environment, our brains are constantly trying to figure out that environment, and it's doing so amongst kind of along several factors. But the 3 primary factors are duration, how long this is going to last; pathway, what's my route in, out, or through; and then outcome, what's the end state. Now, if we are in absence of one or more of those 3 things, duration, pathway, outcome, we start to feel anxiety and stress and all that stuff that comes with it. Okay. I'll give you a quick example. I'll give the audience a quick example. Let's just take illness. Okay. So strep throat is an illness all of us are familiar with. Many of us have had strep throat. When we get strep throat, we're only mildly anxious because there is a pathway. There's an antibiotic you can take for strep throat, and there is an outcome. You're going to get better. People don't die from strep throat. Okay. What we don't know necessarily is the duration, because you may respond to antibiotics a little bit faster than I do. So it might take you 3 days. It might take me 7 days. Okay. But our anxiety levels is mild. All right. Now let's think about the flu. The flu is another illness. In today's environment, in today's world, most of us, at least who are in countries with good medical facilities, we don't die from the flu. Okay, but there's no vaccine for the flu, and there's no medicine for the flu, right? So when we get the flu, we are now in absence of two things. We're in absence of pathway. We don't know the way out, and we're in absence of duration. We know the outcome because we're going to get better. We know we'll get better. We just don't know duration. We don't know pathway. So our anxiety level is higher, kind of moderate. All right. Now let's just think of a disease that shows up on the planet and no one's seen it before. Okay. Some people are dying. Some people are not dying. There's no known vaccine, and we don't know how long it's going to last. Right. Well, this is 2020 for everybody. This was COVID when it first showed up. All of us had anxiety levels was up here. So all moving horizons is it's a technique where you take control, you generate certainty and take control of your environment by creating your own duration pathway outcome. Okay. So here's an example. In Hell Week, you run around with big heavy boats on your head for hours and hours. Every time you move, you're running with these heavy boats. And I remember I can't remember, maybe a Tuesday morning. It was like 3 a.m. We were on the beach running with our boats. We were all miserable. And I remember running with my boat, and next to us was a sandberm. And I remember saying to myself, you know what? I'm just going to focus on getting to the end of this sandberm. Now, what I did in that moment is I immediately created my own DPO, my own duration pathway outcome. Duration from now until end of sandberm, pathway from here to end of sandberm, and outcome end of sandberm. And in doing so, I generated my own dopamine reward system. I kicked in my own dopamine system and generated a goal, a certainty thing that I could actually move towards. And as soon as I hit that wicket, as soon as I got to the end of that sandberm, it gave me a dopamine reward that allowed me to come back out and pick another horizon. Okay. So all moving horizons is an ability to, in the moment, ask yourself, what do I know? What can I control? You focus on that horizon. You achieve, or that DPO, you achieve that, you come back out and you pick a new horizon. All right. Now, a couple things we have to understand about the moving horizons process for your listeners to know. First of all, the distance of these horizons that we pick is highly subjective to the individual and subjective to the intensity of the environment. So in other words, the more intense the environment, the shorter that horizon is going to probably be. I remember freezing in the surf zone in SEAL training, and it was just, bone chillingly cold. And I remember my horizon was, I'm going to count 5 waves. That was my horizon. Sometimes my horizon was, I'm going to make it to the next meal. Sometimes my horizon was, I'm going to make it to the next evolution or the next day or to the end of the sandberm. Okay. So as individuals, we have to modulate that horizon distance. And we can do this in any environment. We can do this in SEAL training. We can do this in our offices. We can do this in traffic. All we have to do is start practicing picking something you can control and focus on, moving to that, and then picking something new. But be very wary as you practice that. If you pick a horizon that's too far, okay, what's going to happen is you're going to lose. Well, let me back up. What they've studied about the brain is when we pick a goal, okay, the conduct of picking a goal actually creates a level of dopamine in our system, okay? Because dopamine is actually a chemical that gets us up and moving. If we pick a goal that's too far away, we're going to run out of dopamine before we get there, and we will quit, okay? The reason why we quit anything is because we've run out of dopamine. And so if you are practicing horizons and you've picked something that's too far away and you feel like quitting, it's because it's too far away, right? All you need to do in those moments, the good news is all you need to do in those moments is pull that horizon in, all right? Now, most of us who work out have done this before, okay? We have a weight bench or whatever, or we're doing push-ups and we say, I'm going to do 10 reps, and we get to 8 and we're like, okay, just 2 more, right? What we've just done is we've pulled our horizon in and we've reset our dopamine. Okay. So I really encourage people in any grind, but even in regular everyday life, to practice this idea, this technique of moving horizons and picking your own duration pathway outcome.
Yeah, I think that the corresponding of moving horizon in the tech sector is more like, when, for example, there is like a deadline, or you think that the task, you are not able to do a task and so on. Maybe, you just start saying, hey, okay, let's take all this task that maybe it's not so clear, and let's thinking clearly, divide it in goals, right?
Yes.
And let's focus on creating this sort of snowball effect, right? Where
Yes.
you create a task, then you raise your level of dopamine because you feel in control, right? When
Yeah.
you feel in control, you say, okay, I'm doing great.
Yep.
I have done this. Okay, let's do the next one. Only the next one. Okay, again, the next
Yeah.
one, the next
That's
one,
right.
right?
Just
But
we have to
it's
be
also
careful, even in the programmer world. Be careful to not pick horizons that are too big, okay? Because it could be I'm just going to focus on this line of code, Or I've had business folks say I'm just going to focus on this email, 5 minutes, that's it, right? So just practice modulating that horizon. But it's literally the neurological equivalent of eating the elephant one bite at a time, okay? You don't take the big thing, you break it into chunks by your own brain, don't let anybody else do it for you, and you move horizons through it. And that's exactly how you can use the same technique that you use to get through Hell Week to get through the daily grind of anything you're doing.
Yes, and always related like to the to the moving horizon, to the grind, but also to the, I would say, mental acuity, right? You also talk a lot about mental acuity. Before we said no that especially in a firefight, for example, in the war, you need to manage this enormous, giant amount of information. You need to be very fast, very quick, and you need not to split this information somehow, synthesize them, and take an action right now. Okay, this can also create anxiety, right? Because you say, okay, there is like an overload of information. My question for you is how a person like you and obviously deal with this,
Yeah.
and how people that, for example, now with AI, there is every day there is a new tool. A lot of people feel like, okay, I'm not able to handle this because there are a lot of tools. I don't know what to do. I think it's a bit like the same as a Navy SEAL, more or less, in a war that is like dealing with a lot of this information.
Yeah.
How you are dealing with this?
Well, there's a couple ways you deal with it, and it was 2 ways. So the first way is teamwork. Okay, in other words, if you have a team, a SEAL team is by definition a team. So if we're in a gunfight, we're in a very uncertain, very challenging situation. I now have a team that can prioritize certain things and take care of certain things that I don't have to. So with all this information that's going on, I might have one guy focused on this, another guy focused on this, I'm focused on that, right? So teaming helps this a great deal. The other way we do it is we also, as part of our moving horizons process, when we ask ourselves, what do I know? What can I control? Part of that question involves the threat level. In other words, there's a triage going on in our brains as well. In other words, I'm going to pick something. I'm going to pick something that's the most important in my moment right now, or the most, and i.e., usually the most threatening. What's the most threatening thing in my moment right now? I'm going to deal with that first. Everything else, I'm not going to worry about. A great example would be when you're skydiving. When you go to open your chute, if you have a malfunction and the chute's all screwed up, you stop thinking about everything other than taking care of that malfunction. You don't care about, what your boots, you don't care about your scenery, your surrounding. You are just focused on that malfunction. You're focused on the most immediate, most dangerous threat in that moment. So I think part of the prioritization process, part of the moving horizon process needs to be, what do I know? What can I control? And it's a triage as well. Okay, what's the most time sensitive, threatening thing in my moment right now? I'm going to deal with that first. Once that's taken care of, what's the next most? What's the next most? And again, this might be something, depending on the severity of the environment. It might take a while to get through all those threatening things. But emergency room technicians and doctors and surgeons do this all the time. They are literally in the moment saying, okay, what is the most life threatening thing I have to deal with? I'm going to do that first. Then I'm going to do this. Then I'm going to do that. We just have to but understand that process of mentally breaking that down in the moment is in fact mitigating your fear, because it's forcing you to act and not think about the fear part of it. This is why you hear stories of people in very seemingly kind of dangerous and scary environments, and you ask them, were you afraid? And they're like, no, I wasn't afraid. I was just working the problem. Okay, and that's how it is. And I was never afraid when I was a Navy SEAL in very dangerous situations, because in those moments, I was just working the problem. I was just doing what I had to do. But a great example that's a little less I guess scary. Well, I guess it could be scary, but more relatable is I was listening to Buzz Aldrin talk about when he and Neil Armstrong were landing on the moon for the very first time, and they're in the lunar landing module. They'd left the capsule and they were headed down. And the interviewer asked him, they said, well, here you are, you're flying down to the moon. No one's ever done this before. Okay. If you there's a chance you might get down and you might be trapped on the moon. Okay. Were you scared? Were you frightened that moment? And Buzz said, no, I wasn't frightened. All I was thinking about was what I had to do. What's the next thing I have to do? And then this, and then that. It was just going step by step by step. And by doing this effectively, you will literally mitigate your fear.
Yeah, Rich, I agree 100% with you, but I'm trying not to think about like a listener, like one of our listeners right now. No, I'm thinking one of the main opinion about this could be, okay, I totally agree. The guy is completely right, but there is an issue here. No, he is a person that has been trained by the top coach in the world and so on. So me, as a normal person, how can I train these,
Yes.
these attributes? We talk a lot about the attributes and moving horizon, but I think that here, like the elephant in the room for a normal person is, I think more or less everyone agree with this. And the question is, okay, but what can I start doing now or
Yes.
from tomorrow in order to improve this? I don't know, the cunning and all these attributes that you talk about.
Well, first thing is, every human being can begin to get a sense of their own attributes, okay, and where they fall. In other words, we have an assessment tool that can help you do that. If you're interested, we'll give it to you, so it's in the show notes.
Yes.
But when you understand your ranking of your attributes, you understand what attributes are easier for you and what attributes have a little bit more difficulty. Okay, so you may be someone who's very good at compartmentalization, or it might be something that's more difficult. If you know it's going to be more difficult, then okay, I need to more deliberately work on this. And we can always do that. We can deliberately work on this. So that's one thing. Understand where you fall on these attributes, because your unique attribute profile is going to come with some very distinct advantages and some blind spots, but some distinct advantages. So figure out what kind of vehicle you are. The next piece of good news is that this moving horizons process can be practiced anywhere, anytime. You don't need to be in uncertainty, challenge, and stress to practice this moving horizons process. You go to the gym and you could practice it in the gym, and there's no uncertainty in the gym. Okay. There might be some difficulty, but there's no uncertainty. Okay. You can practice it in the gym. You can practice it in the office. You can practice it at home. You can practice it in traffic. I've done this. I've done this training. We do training for organizations and teams. And in one case, we gave this training for the moving horizons. And the next day, I was giving some more training. The gentleman came in and said, "Hey, listen, Rich, I was practicing moving horizons last night when I was doing my emails." I said, "Okay, I'm just going to focus on this one email. I'm going to block out everything else. I'm going to focus on that." And he did that. And then he said, "Okay, what's the next meeting?" Or I'm going to spend 5 minutes and only focus on this. Okay. This particular gentleman had to really pick short horizons, because, again, one of the there's so many benefits to today's technology. Obviously, we all know one of the side effects or downfalls to today's technology is this kind of doom scrolling, that we get on Instagram and YouTube. So many people are so used to the scrolling that their dopamine tolerance levels are very, very short, because they're used to 10-second clips. Okay, so for those people, they're going to have to create very short horizons to begin with, and then slowly start to move them out, because they've exercised their dopamine system too much. So they have to create shorter horizons. But this is all stuff you can practice, and you don't need to be in uncertainty, challenge, and stress to do so.
Yes, what I understood is that the main idea, in summary, is that like somehow trying to inject in our life, we should try to inject in our life like some micro dose of discomfort, right? Of course,
Yes.
we need to adapt this discomfort based on our level. As you said, I totally agree with you regarding this drone scroll and so on, this negative effect, no, that is also shrinking our attention span, right?
Right.
So it's like the gym, no? You start with some weight and then
Yes.
you increase. The same for the rhythm. One important thing, not it's about the fear, right? Imagine that a person is want to try to do that, like a thing for the first time and so on. For example, pivot their careers, but they are paralyzed or asking for an increase in salary. I would like to know what is your definition of fair, and how a Navy SEAL not deal with fear, and how a Navy SEAL find the courage, to
Yeah.
act despite the inevitable fear, right? Maybe we
Yes.
can learn
Yes.
something also.
Well, it's a fascinating topic. So fear. So I'm good friends with a guy named Andrew Huberman. Dr. Andrew Huberman has a very popular podcast now. We've been friends since well before his podcast, and we did a lot of work together. He was studying fear at his lab in Stanford, and we studied fear together. And we both kind of hypothesized that fear is in fact a combination of two factors. Okay, those two factors are uncertainty plus anxiety. Uncertainty plus anxiety equal fear. So you can have one or the other, and you don't necessarily have fear. You can be anxious but not uncertain. All right, that might be, I have a presentation to give next week. I know the presentation, I know the people I'm giving it to. I'm a little anxious, but there's no uncertainty there. So there's no fear there. You can be uncertain without being anxious. Okay, well, that's every kid on Christmas Eve. We know that there's no fear there. All right. When you combine the two, you get fear. So the question is, how do we mitigate fear? The way we mitigate fear is we seek to buy down one or two or both of those equations. We buy down uncertainty and or anxiety. Now, how do you buy down uncertainty? The way you buy down uncertainty is you move horizons. You pick horizons because what you're doing is you're creating certainty in your environment by picking something to focus on. You're buying down uncertainty. That starts to buy down the fear. How do we buy down anxiety? Well, there's definitely different ways we can buy down anxiety. There are some physiological tools you can use. There's breath work that will bring your autonomic arousal down. There's visual tools that you can bring to the table. I talk about a lot of these in my second book, but you can use physiological things to bring down your anxiety. You start doing those things, it brings down the fear. Okay. And then I'll give one more tip for people. There's a reframing technique that if you're able to do it, it really works well. But it's easier said than done. But the trick is this: we know that uncertainty plus anxiety equals fear. What we don't know, or what we have to remember, is uncertainty plus curiosity equals excitement. So in some cases, we can reframe our anxiety to curiosity and actually have a different result. So quick example here. I don't like roller coasters. I hate roller coasters. Okay. My wife loves roller coasters. When it was last year, it was her birthday. We were at the Universal Studios. She said, "Rich, can you go on the roller coaster with me?" Of course, I'm going to say, I love my wife. So I'm going to say yes. So I am standing in line for this roller coaster. It's like the biggest, fastest one there. And I'm feeling that anxiety. And so I say to myself, okay, how can I reframe this? Well, growing up as a kid, I always wanted to be a fighter pilot and fly fighter jets. My brother eventually did that. But I love everything about flying. And so I said, I'm just going to pretend while I'm on this roller coaster, I'm going to pretend I'm in a fighter jet. I'm going to reframe it, right? And I tried to turn that anxiety into curiosity. And it changed my experience of the ride, okay? I felt better on the ride than I would have before. Same thing when I started public speaking. Public speaking can be very anxiety filled if you haven't done it. There's some fear there. So I began to say to myself, okay, well, instead of being anxious, I'm curious to see how the crowd is going to respond to this joke, or curious to see how the crowd is going to respond to this topic. Okay, so if possible, another technique to buy down fear is to reframe your anxiety to curiosity just by asking some simple questions.
I totally agree, and I was also thinking about another topic that is about how you talk to yourself, no? In the sense that also your own identity. Do you think that this ability to reframe, a specific situation in order to, instead of to have fear, not to be curious about, and then also I assume that in our case, if you're curious about, then you learn more and you also reduce uncertainty, right?
Yes.
Because sometimes uncertainty, I think, derives from the fact that you don't know a lot about
Yes.
something. But then if you just, for example, what I like to do, I use AI in order to plot future scenario, about something. And now I think I'm shrinking a bit the uncertainty, right? Because I'm saying, okay, before I didn't see anything, in the future. Now, at least I have 5, 10 different scenarios. And more or less, I know that the future will be in one of these, right?
Yes,
so
yes. It's a wonderful technique. And I'll just say I guarantee there's many people in your audience who have done this before, where they have been anxious about something. They finally do it and they're like, well, that wasn't that bad. The key is to say, to get to that wasn't that bad even before you get there. Don't waste energy worrying about it before you get there. Okay. So you're absolutely right. It's unique.
Yeah, Rich, we are unfortunately, we have talked for 30 minutes. I don't want to to bother you for too long. Just one last question is,
Sure.
Do you think is there a fundamental truth about human attributes or performance that I haven't asked you? But do you think that our audience needs to
I think the fundamental truth we have to understand is that we all have them. We all have all of them. And understanding our attributes helps us understand our behavior, not only in everyday life, but especially at our most raw. When the what hits the fan, when the environment is deeply complex, we understand our own unique profile. And I want everybody to understand, when they understand their own unique profile of attributes, it's kind of like understanding what vehicle you are. We're all human beings have the same component parts. We're all automobiles, but some of us are Jeeps, some of us are Ferraris, Some of us are SUVs. Okay. But you wouldn't judge those because the Jeep can do things the Ferrari can't do, and the Ferrari can do things the Jeep can't do. So understanding what kind of vehicle you are will help you understand how to remove a lot of the friction in your life and really be proud of and maximize the type of vehicle you are.
Well, thank you very much for this. This has been like an absolute masterclass. And for everyone listening who wants to dive deeper, like into building their own human source code, where they can find your books, follow your work, and connect with you.
Yeah. Best place is our website, www.theattributes.com. You can find our books, the assessment tool, theattributes.com, all the stuff, all of our workshops is all there. So.
Yes, I will put all the information here in the description. Rich, thank you very much for the time. And it has been like really an honor for me. And see you like soon, maybe.
Thank you, my friend. We'll stay in touch.
Stay in touch. Bye. Thank you.
Yeah.